Well, good evening. I'd like to start off just quickly thanking everyone here and saying it is great to be with you tonight. I appreciate a second chance to speak before you tonight. As it was mentioned, you guys have been a supporter of me for the past 4 years almost now that I've been at Nicholasville, and I have to say that you may not realize how much that makes what I'm trying to do easier, because I'm not worried about living day to day, and my wife's not worried about a place to stay. And, you guys take that burden off me by supporting me, and I just can't say thank you enough. I started preaching 4 years ago in October. I'd done secular work before then, just so you know a little bit more about me maybe, if you didn't. I'd been a manager at Lowe's, and I'd done sales and for all of my life until I finally got asked the question why I wasn't preaching more, and I didn't have an answer for it that wasn't, well, I should be probably, and I started. And I attribute a lot of that to both my brother-in-laws, Ray Warfel and Jim Hardy. They helped me have to face that, and I know you all know them as well too. So I just up front, I want to thank you and say I appreciate your all's continued support and the occasional emails I get from different individuals here. If you haven't noticed, I am slow at responding on emails, so please be patient with me. I usually get back to you, and thank you for that, but I am not a computer fan. I'm a paper fan, and I'm a person fan, so I am slow on the electronics. But tonight, I want to start out with the ideal of fan or follower. And I'd like to start with a story, and maybe it's just me getting used to being somewhere different, but I feel like I'm screaming at you guys. Am I too loud, or am I okay? Okay. I got a couple thumbs from people I recognize in the back, so okay. There's a man named Charlie Moore who moved into a new community, and he was trying to make friends and get his family involved in that community, and he thought, you know what, I'll join the local softball league. And I'll go and I'll make friends there. So he goes to the opening game, and Charlie loads up his family in the car, and they head to the park to join in that night and to meet his new friends. And Charlie gets up to bat, and he squares his feet, and he gets his shoulders set, and as the ball came across the plate, he missed it by a mile. And the crowd groaned. But one voice over the crowd could be heard. "You can do it, Mr. Moore." The second pitch came in, and again, he swung wildly, and he missed it. And again, that voice could be heard. "You can do it, Mr. Moore." And the third pitch came in, and he swung again, and the voice cried out, "That's okay, Mr. Moore." And when the game was over, the family got back in the car, and they were heading home, and they were going down the road, and the dad turned to his son in the back seat and said, "Was that you that yelled out, 'You can do it, Mr. Moore'?" And when his son admitted that it was him, and it was indeed his voice, the dad said he appreciated his son's encouragement, but he was curious, "Why did you call me Mr. Moore?" And the boy said, "Well, I didn't want anybody to know I was related to you." I'm going to make some applications to that here when we get here, but good afternoon. I want to start and discuss a lesson of a series that I'm doing up in Nicholasville with you, and I just want to share the starting lesson with you tonight. And I hope you'll see how this will hopefully be something that would push our group up there, or any group, as we talk and consider this, about being fiercely faithful followers. And I want us to think about what is the difference between a fan and a follower tonight. And I think you'll see a difference, hopefully by the end of this lesson, because we serve a great God, and the knowledge of Him will motivate us to truly follow Him if we will do that. Because He's worthy of following. He's the best. He's the most loving. He's the most powerful being ever. And it's my hope and prayer that as you continue every day in your life, that you will keep learning about this God that we're going to talk about tonight. So let's talk about being a fan or a follower. The story about the ball game is funny, I think. It's cute. I can kind of hear it and get that, because that would probably be my kids cheering me if I was trying to hit a ball. But I think it gives a good example of what we do today. There are a lot of people that claim to be followers of Jesus, and they cheer for Him, but they're really, when you look at them, just fans. And I hope at the end of this lesson you'll see. And I hope that when we look at this lesson together like this, you'll also see that we need to check and make sure we haven't fallen over into that fan column. We are truly called to be followers of Jesus Christ. And we need to make sure that we do that. And you may recognize some of this. There's a Kyle Idleman that wrote a book called Not a Fan. And in that book, he points out that there are people who are followers of Christ, and there are others that are more like fans. And I like some of the book. Like a lot of secular books, you kind of read it and you scrape away all the stuff you don't like about it, and you take a few of the good things that you do like about it. But I think he made some good points in this concept. So what is the difference? Well, I'd like to suggest that fans are folks who only go to church. They don't really do much for Jesus because he's not a priority. And these people are happy to show up and shout out encouragement at church, but they really don't act like they're related to Christ, much like the son in that story. They'll cheer on Jesus, but will they do anything for him? Do they want to be connected to him? They're willing to shout out, "You can do it, Jesus," but that's about it. The difference between a fan and a follower is a fan just shows up. They'll stay as long as it benefits them, but if it doesn't benefit them anymore, usually they stop hanging around. And as long as they're happy or things are going their way and they think they're going the way they should go, they'll show up. But on the other hand, they also often easily get offended when they don't get their own way, or if the preacher preaches too long or too short sometimes. I've actually had someone tell me I spoke too quick, which is unusual for a preacher, I hear. But they may not like a decision of the leadership, or they may not like the way the songs are led, or they may not like the way the service flows, and a fan will leave because they're just that, they're a fan. Fans are those who walk away, and we have to be careful that we don't become a fan or turn into a fan. You know, a fan is someone that will be at the basketball game, and I'm sure there's nobody in here that likes Kentucky. But if there are people in here that like Kentucky, you can tell the difference between a true fan and a follower of the Kentucky team, because you'll go to a basketball game, and if they get really far ahead and it looks like they're going to win, a fan will go, "I can get out in front of the crowd and not get stuck in traffic," and they'll leave early. Or if the team starts losing real bad and there's no way they're going to win, they don't want to stay around and see it, and they leave because they're fans. But I'll tell you, a follower, on the other hand, stays. Well, when things aren't going their way, fans leave. And that's just indeed what happens in John 6 and verse 66. As a result of this, many of his disciples withdrew and were not walking with him anymore. These people no longer followed him. But why did they just stop following him? It's because Jesus had offended them. He had said something they didn't like. They were pushed beyond their comfort zone. So they left and they didn't come back. You see, the crowd wasn't there to follow Jesus. In fact, they were just really there, not even for him at all. I think they were there because they expected Jesus to be there for them. That's what they were looking for. Just a day or so before this incident, if you remember, Jesus had been teaching a large group and a crowd in the text of Matthew 14, verses 13 through 21, and it tells us that 5,000 men had gathered along with women and children in that passage to hear Christ preach to them. But as the day progressed, Jesus knew the people were getting hungry, and he had compassion on them. So he performed a miracle, and we'll all remember that Jesus took 5 small loaves and 2 fish from a little boy's lunch, and he blessed them, and he broke them, and he gave them to the disciples to hand out to the crowd to feed them, and everybody was fed. Then Jesus sent the disciples amongst the people to collect the leftovers, and they picked up over 12 baskets full of food that was left over from those 5 loaves and 2 fishes, and the crowd was impressed. And some, even at that time, began to talk of taking Jesus by force to make him their king. But knowing this, Jesus slipped away from the crowds, and later that night he walks on the water and he joins his disciples in their boat as they cross to the other side of the Sea of Galilee. And in John 6:24, it tells us then So when the crowd saw that Jesus was not there, nor his disciples, they themselves got in small boats, and they came to Capernaum. It didn't move forward. Seeking Jesus. They went looking for him. Why? Well, I think when we put it all together, it's because he fed them. He gave them a free lunch. That's what they went looking for. Because when he makes that comment in 6 and 66, they stop. And I'll tell you, I'll fall prey to that. One of the things I do to give you a little bit more about myself, I work 2 days a week at Lowe's still. And that lets me get benefits from my family. It lets me have retirement. It lets me do some things along with a little bit of monetary support during the month. But it's primarily about providing those things since I still have kids at home that are needed, braces and eyeglasses and so forth. But I'll tell you, there's a time when I'll see on the lunch board that they're having a picnic, and I'll go over for the free lunch even if I'm not working. So I'm not saying there's a wrong thing there, but the reason in which they were going to Jesus was because they wanted fed. They came back for more food. But Jesus didn't come to be a lunch buffet. That's the thing we have to realize. He's not here for fans that want to follow him because they want stuff from him. And Jesus had no intention to feeding them this next time. And they weren't happy about it. They wanted him to do another miracle, but he would not do it. And why didn't he do it? It's because Jesus didn't want fans. He wants followers. So what does a follower look like? The difference comes down to this is the motivation and their priorities. When you think about that same example I gave you as a fan that leaves early from the game, a follower is sitting in the seat even when there's no way they can win, waiting for the UK fight song in my old Kentucky home to be sung at the end of the game. They don't care about the 2-hour traffic jam getting out of the stadium. They don't care about this because they are following that team wherever they need to be a follower of that team. It's a different motivation when we think about this. A follower is a type that means that when they sing the hymn, "Where He Leads Me," and you see the words to this song, "Where He leads me." There we go. "Where He leads me, I will follow. Where He leads me, I will follow. Where He leads me, I will follow. I'll go with Him all the way." Now, fans usually don't sing that song that way, or at least that's not what it would sound like. They might mouth the words. But, fans will say, "I'll sing with you till it's summertime and I got to go on vacation," or "I'll sing with you until baseball season comes in and I need to go to games, or my vacation comes up. Or I'll go with you till it's wintertime and then I'll house jump down to Florida," which nothing wrong if you're snowbirding, but what I'm going to tell you is when you snowbird and you go to Florida, be a part and be active in the church you're at down there. And then you're still being a follower of Christ. So please don't come up to me afterwards getting on me for that one. Be a follower. "I'll go with you till life's a bummer." That's a real official word there, right, kids? Bummer. No, times are going to get hard. You have to be a follower even then. "I'll go with you until I don't feel like getting out of bed anymore. I'll go with you until people mistreat me. I'll go with you, but I don't feel like you've answered my prayers, so I'm not. So I'm not going to go with you along the way." You see, friends, fans give up and they walk away. They stop being followers that they need to be. But followers follow no matter what. They follow Jesus no matter what life is required of them. And you can see the difference in how fans versus followers worship even. And there'll be some times where you might have visitors here and they're just kind of looking, or you might be talking with someone that you're having conversations, but they're just kind of a fan. And we need to try to get them to see they need to be a follower. They need to be more. Fandom will not get them into heaven. Following will. Fans go to church to experience it and see what can be done for them. And this makes them feel religious. But it doesn't make any difference in how they live. When they get back in their car tonight, when we get back, if I get back in my car and I'm only a fan, I just revert back to my old self. But followers go to church to worship Jesus and to have an experience that changes them. You came here tonight, if you're a follower, looking for something in the Scripture that was either read or read by one of the young man that read before, or the songs that have been said, and you're looking for words in those things to make a difference in your life tonight. Followers come to worship service out of obedience to a Lord that has asked them to worship Him. And they come to this building to meet with the other Christians and to see how they can help others. Jesus told the fan-filled crowds after feeding the 5,000 in John 6, 51 through 57, I am the living bread that came down out of heaven. If anyone eats of this bread, he will live forever. And the bread also which I will give to you for the life of the world is my flesh. Then the Jews began to argue with one another, saying, how can this man give us his flesh to eat? So Jesus said to them, truly, truly, I say to you, unless you eat of the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, you have no life in yourselves. He who eats my flesh and drinks my blood has eternal life, and I will raise him up in that last day. For my flesh is true food, and my blood is true drink, and he who eats my flesh and drinks my blood abides in me, and I in him. As the living Father sent me, and I live because of the Father, so he who eats me, he also will live because of me. You know, even when we hear this today, it sounds a bit bizarre. It's not, you know, if you're just reading that for the first time or chewing on this for the first time or really haven't contemplated this, it sounds a bit bizarre, and I'll tell you, it does to me too sometimes. I mean, eating his flesh, drinking his blood, right? Something's not quite right. Or at least a fan would say something's not quite right. And if you think about Jesus' words as literal right here, you'd be right. Something's not right. But Jesus isn't talking about this literally right here. He's speaking spiritual words filled with spiritual truths at this moment. And Jesus taught this way many times in his ministry. You remember what he said we should do if an eye causes us to sin? We're to pluck it out. Or if a hand causes us to sin, we're to cut it off. If Jesus is speaking literally here in that, you and I would be in a world of hurt. But we know Jesus wasn't talking about literally plucking of the eye or cutting off the hands. He's trying to get a point of suggesting to do extreme things in our life in order not to sin. Big things in our life not to sin. Maybe that's deleting a Facebook account. Maybe that's getting rid of a smartphone totally, or making sure we aren't even on a computer, or we set up some boundaries of stuff. He's talking about doing big things to make sure that we don't sin, just like plucking the eye and cutting off the hand. We also know this isn't about taking communion here, and people mistakenly apply it to these verses. It's about us having life because Jesus did what he did, and we find our nourishment as Christians because we feed on his sacrifice. It's about being consumed by Jesus. He is in us like bread and drink, is what he's saying. We're not here to go through a ritualistic ceremony. We're not here to fulfill our quota of religious activities for the week. We're not here to punch our time clock and say we were here at 6 tonight and 7 on Wednesday and 10 or whatever time it is Sunday morning again. We're not here to do that. We show up here because we want to see what I can do for, I'm going to pick on Kyle since I know his name the best. I'm here tonight because what I can do for Kyle, or this morning, or whatever that may be. That's what a follower is here for. We're here to feed on Jesus. This is a smorgasbord of Jesus right now. And we should eat it often. We should be eating His Word often. We should eat it as often as we get the chance. And I liken to that. We should be here every time there's a Bible class going on. We shouldn't miss a meal. You can tell I don't miss too many. We shouldn't miss a meal. We should feed every time we have a chance to feed. We should be a part. We should be looking through these things. Because it's a Jesus who died for us and was buried and rose from the grave. That is why communion is placed right in the middle of our worship a lot of times. Because it's all about Jesus. And it's not because it's a ritualistic requirement, but it's because we need to remember why we are here. Why we are following Him. Everything we should do should be centered around the table. Everything we do should remind us of Christ and His sacrifice. Our prayers should be based on Him and through Him. Our sermon should find power in what He's done. Because without Jesus and His sacrifice on the cross, nothing else we do is worthwhile to a follower. Really, it's so simple. The bread and cup are just reminders of that truth. How simple of a thing to leave us. But unless we feed on the sacrifice of Christ in our daily lives, our faith is little more than ritual and we're a fan. So we have to make sure we don't slide into that fan column. And I'll tell you, I know of times in my life where I was more of a fan than a follower, and I'm sorry to say that, but if we're all truthful and examine ourselves, that will happen. But it should help us when we see friends and people we care about and loved ones that we have that think they're followers that are really fans, to try to help push them to be the follower they need to be. In John 6:41 and 42, it says, "Therefore the Jews were grumbling about Him because He said, 'I am the bread that came down out of heaven.' And they were saying, 'Is not this Jesus, the son of Joseph, whose father and mother we know? How does He now say, I've come down out of heaven?'" The crowd was upset with Jesus here. They were starting to grumble. And then they said something nasty to those around them. And you know what they're saying really is they're saying that Jesus is a liar. He couldn't possibly have come down out of heaven. He couldn't possibly, because we know who His folks are. These people were fans. They got offended by the Lord and they wouldn't follow through to the end of this. So they didn't care if they insulted Him. They didn't care what they were saying. They didn't care that they spread discontent among those that might follow Him. All they cared about was that they justified themselves. They were willing to damage Jesus so they could look good in their own eyes. And fans in the church do that as well, and we have to be careful. They'll say nasty things about elders and preachers and members and decisions that are made when they're unhappy with it. They'll spread rumors or discontent so they can justify their decisions. But a follower wouldn't think about hurting Jesus or His bride. To think about speaking ill of the church is like speaking ill of the bride of Christ. Oh, may we never. After the crowds left and they walked away, never to return, Jesus says to the 12, "You do not want to go away also, do you?" And Peter's answer is interesting to me. He replies, "Lord, to whom shall we go? You have words of eternal life. We have believed and have come to know that You are the Holy One of God." Did you catch what Peter was saying there? They didn't want to leave Jesus. Where else would they go? Jesus had what they needed in their lives, and they believed in Jesus and knew who He was. Peter was saying they didn't want anyone else, and that they would follow Jesus wherever He led. When you think about this song, Peter and these men could sing this song. Where he leads me, I will follow. Where he leads me, I will follow. Where he leads me, I will follow. I'll go with him all the way. Well, I hope I've stated that clearly. This is something I'm passionate about because we all need to be followers, or we're fooling ourselves. One day we'll hear, "Depart, I know thee not." The fans will. And I always like to leave my lessons with a challenge for the week. And my challenge to you all tonight is this week, look at yourself in the mirror of your life and see if you're being a follower. Can you look and go, "I've been following, and I'm in this for the long haul, and I'm in this wherever it goes, and I'm not just being here"? Don't be a fan. Learn about God. Realize who He is. He is worthy to be followed. And then become a fiercely faithful follower. And to give a little bit of plug, if you go through, if you want to see a list of fiercely faithful followers in the Scripture, you go over to Hebrews 11. And you look at Noah and Abraham and Sarah and David and Samson and the ones that are mentioned in what we call the roll call of faith sometimes. They did things that were hard, that had no precedent before them. Build a boat 450 feet? What? And he did it. Leave my home, move around, never to really be settled again until he talks about the promise through his son. Samson, at the end of his life, being more faithful than the beginning. See, I oftentimes, a lot of times, try to make Samson a fan, but Hebrews 11 tells me not. He was a follower. He finished it. No matter what the Lord says, the kind of follower who loves his fellow Christians, even when things get bumpy with each other, we're a family. That's what we have to remember. I address the Lake Street group up there as my family almost every service. And what happened in families when you were growing up? You may have got old enough to get out of most of this, but do you remember when you were a brother and a sister and you were young? You bumped into each other, you fought, you were ornery to one another, but you still lived through it. And if anybody else stepped on one of your family, you'd protect them. Don't treat any one of your brothers or sisters in here any different, because there's going to be bumps and arguments. Be faithful. Be a follower. Look out for one another. Because I'll tell you, if you're here and you're thinking you're anywhere, if you're anywhere thinking you're at a group that's never going to mess up, you've got a false expectation set. We will have troubles. We will have struggles. We will mess up. Worse than that, we'll sin. But if we've committed to put on Jesus through baptism and be His child, we will work through that together because we're followers. We're going to stay till the end and work this out. So do it, and do it fiercely this week. Obey what He says in His holy book this week. Don't base your relationship on the Lord, on this group or people. Base it on Him and Him alone, and then have a relationship with these people because they're trying to do the same. Brothers and sisters. I guess lastly, what I'm trying to mention or say is that I'm telling you, being a fan won't cut it when Judgment Day comes. You will be sorely disappointed when you stand before the God of heaven and His Son at His right hand and face judgment. And you will be shocked when you hear, "Depart, I know thee not," because you fell in the fan column. Be faithful. Be fiercely faithful. Be a follower, and that will last you forever. and you will enjoy heaven in the presence of the Lord forever. So tonight, have you put on Jesus? Have you obeyed His will? You know, I like this slide. I found this and I come across it and I use it a lot because it shows 1 Corinthians 15 and talks about the gospel and Jesus the Christ, His death, His burial, and His resurrection for the sin of man. And then it likens it and parallels it right next to Romans 6 and how we need to die and put to death under the watery grave of baptism and be raised anew to be like and with the Lord. Right now is your chance. We're going to stand up and we're going to sing a song of invitation, and that's for anyone here that's never done that, or that's for anyone here that may think and feel like they've been a fan for a while and they want help in prayers from your brothers and sisters to get back on the path of being a follower of Jesus we need to be. If we can help, please come as we stand and sing.